Well, today we're going to talk about Chris Cuomo again. Chris Cuomo put himself back up at the top of my hit list because the guy is just, you just can't stop him from saying stupid stuff. And today he's going to be talking about how Donald Trump used the N word, not the N word, the other N word. All right, the word nationalism. And he goes through it trying to redefine it. And he even throws in George Orwell, whose writings on nationalism were directly connected to the Nazis and the Japanese and their nationalism and how they abused it and attacked their neighbors. What he fails to understand is that lots of countries are nationalistic, including the English. There's nobody more fucking nationalistic than the French and the United States. But he's going to go through his own version of what it means and then have some panelists on. It's going to be hysterical.
So the word arguably could mean different things to different people, arguably. But here's what it is not. It is not patriotism. It is not populism.
You are wrong. Nationalism is driven by both, or drives both, patriotism and populism. Lots of countries have populist governments that are highly nationalistic. The United States was founded on nationalism. All right, go back and read a little bit. Read about Madison. Read about Hamilton. All right, read about Lincoln. Lincoln was Euclidean nationalism fan. Okay, let's just keep going.
Which is about supporting the interests of ordinary folks. One more thing it is not. It is not American. As I said, it is antithetical to the idea of this country as an example to the rest of the world.
Really, Chris? I guess you missed history class, okay? Okay, this is an article that I found that was very interesting in The Atlantic. The political party of Jefferson and Madison was born with its call for the return to the spirit of '76. That's the revolution. Concealing many complex reasons for its emergence, the main target of their growing partisanship was Hamilton, architect of Washington administration's national economic policies. For his part, Hamilton, as the leader of the Federalists, believed that Madison and Jefferson were equally dangerous in their inexplicable abandonment of constitutional principles of nationalism and their dangerous and hypocritical populism, okay? So there you have populism and nationalism being at odds with one another, all right? This is just Chris being just talking right out of his ass, all right? And then on to here, Wikipedia. Nationalism and Americanism remain topics in the modern United States. Political scientist Paul McCartney, for instance, argues that as a nation defined by a creed and sense of mission, Americans tend to equate their interests with those of humanities, which in turn informs their global posture. In certain cases, it may be considered a form of ethnocentrism and American exceptionalism. That's nationalism. But let's just keep going.
A beacon that can shine, not a darkness that can block out the light for others. So we know it's loaded. We also know it can be coded language by the president, sending a message to his base, playing on the divisions in this country even more so.
Yeah, people who love their countries, people who have a sense of nationalistic pride in their country, recognizing that perhaps the United States is superior to most other countries in the world, which is why we have a caravan right now of 7,000 people fleeing a shithole country known as Honduras at this very moment. It's why we have 1/3, I think it's of El Salvador's entire population now living in the United States, and roughly 10 to 15% of Mexico's entire population living here. Why is that? Oh, it's because the U.S. is better. That's why.
That is the stuff of a great debate, and we're going to have it next. All of this is typical, right? Somebody tells the president, don't say that, and then he says, I'm going to say it, I'm really proud to say it. Maybe that's what's driving his new nationalist sympathies, despite the term's historical connotations.
The connotations of nationalism are only negative in reference to World War II, Adolf Hitler, and Japan. They were nationalistic, but they were also militaristic, highly militaristic, and began attacking their neighbors, okay?
I'm proud of our country, and I am a nationalist. It's a word that hasn't been used too much. I'm somebody that wants to help other countries of the world but I also have to take care, we have to take care of our country.
Okay, what's wrong with that statement? I want to do what's right for our country, and I'm also interested in helping other countries in the world. Is that bad? I don't think so.
That's not nationalism. That's patriotism. Say that. Say patriotism.
No, it's not patriotism, Chris. Patriotism has nothing to do with a country's views towards other countries as far as their development and economic growth goes. A nationalist believes it's a much broader term, let's put it that way. It covers the economy and everything else. Patriots defend their country, all right? Patriots do not go on foreign excursions to develop the economies of other countries. It's not patriotism that gets us to give money to countries in Africa or Central America or development funds anywhere else, okay? That's nationalism. It's sharing our wealth and doing what's best for us and others at the same time.
Anyway, whether he sees nationalism for what it is and it's just another way to say America first, it's really loaded, and it raises issues about yet another dog whistle just before the midterms. Is this a calculation, or is this something less? Let's ask our great debaters. We have two great ones for you tonight, Ana Navarro and Steve Cortez. So,
Ana Navarro's on the left. She's an absolutely crazy, hysterical, open borders lunatic. The other fellow is a conservative. Watch what happens.
the president says, look, I want to help other countries. I just love our country, so that makes me a nationalist. Does that make you okay that he's just not using the word the right way?
Look, he also says and puts it into context and says, I shouldn't be saying that word, and they tell me I shouldn't be saying that word because he knows exactly what he's saying. And of course it's a calculated move.
He only knows he shouldn't be saying it because people like you will be doing exactly what you're doing within 24 hours, and it causes trouble among the left.
Because instead of talking about health care, instead of talking about the cover-up that the U.S. has been practically complicit in, that the Trump administration has been complicit in, of the Jamal Khashoggi murder, we are talking about his use of words.
What? Complicit in? Or practically complicit in? She said both in the one sentence. She's wrong, of course, is that the president has said since this incident began, he's asked for fairness. He asked, let's have an investigation, which they're having. And this morning he came out and said what? It was one of the greatest murder cover-ups in history. All right? He has not tried to cover up for it at all. He's asked that everybody be fair and reasonable. And at the end of the day, there isn't much we can do about it other than revoke some passports. All right? We're not going to cut Saudi Arabia off from the rest of the world because they decided to get rid of a dissident who was wanted, and they did it on Saudi soil, as awful as it is. But we'll continue.
And, you know, it is what we've heard from him time and time again. I mean, if at this point you need to hear Trump say that he's a nationalist, if the fact that he questioned a U.S. judge's ability to do his job because his parents were Mexican immigrants, if the Central Park Five, if calling places like El Salvador and Haiti and Africa shitholes wasn't enough for you, then maybe you needed to hear him say this.
Hold on a minute. One, the Central Park Five were accused by the New York Times of being murderers. All right. And Trump said if it's true, they should all be hung for it. They were later found not guilty, and neither the New York Times nor Donald Trump issued a retraction. All right. As far as Honduras, El Salvador, and those places are concerned, they are fucking shitholes. They are terrible shitholes. It's why 1/3 of El Salvador's population has fled and moved to the United States, and why almost 15% of Mexico's entire population is already here, and why there's a caravan with 7,000 people plowing through national borders on the south, heading for the United States to try to get amnesty and to move here. All right? So the fact that Trump is willing to say it is rather refreshing.
As for me, this is redundancy.
Maybe you're right. Steve, is that just the straight truth? Trump is a nationalist with all that word carries.
No, he is a nationalist. I am too, but you don't understand what it does carry. When you try to compare American nationalism to Nazis, for example, you're incredibly mistaken because the Nazis, their perverted nationalism was about racial purity. It was about blood and soil. American nationalism, which, by the way, defeated Nazism, American...
Bingo. This guy gets it.
Nationalism is about shared ideals. It's about a constitution.
That's not
It has nothing to
nationalism.
do with race, for example. Yes, it is. Well, by the way, you don't get, Chris, to just decide. Nobody made you CEO of the English language.
You know better than
that
George
is
Orwell?
nationalism to me.
Do you know better than George Orwell?
Yeah.
Do you know who that is?
Yes, I do.
Do you
yes,
know better
I do.
than he?
Yes, yeah.
Well, then
I've
why
heard
does he
George
see a
Orwell. Yes, I
difference
have. Read
between
his
patriotism and
books.
nationalism? Why does he see it as pernicious? Why does he see it as
Let me tell
investing
you-
itself in these ugly concepts that you disagree with?
Right. My guess is he was talking at that time about specifically the Nazis. But what I'm telling you is that American nationalism, which has been a great force for good in this entire world, is about shared values. It's about our Constitution. It's about our flag.
Then why doesn't he just say
Sometimes it's
patriotism?
easier. Sometimes it's easier to describe something. Let me tell you why. Because sometimes it's easier to describe something by what it is not. And what it is not, and it's the opposite of, is globalism.
What he doesn't understand, meaning Chris Cuomo, is that patriotism and nationalism can be linked, and they can also be very, very, very much disconnected. And as far as what George Orwell said, he read this earlier in the show, the famous Orwell line, and I'm going to get over to it so you can see it. What he read was nationalism, on the other hand, is inseparable from a desire for power, okay? And that was the quote that Cuomo used. He didn't finish the quote, all right? The full quote was, nationalism, on the other hand, is inseparable from the desire for power. The abiding purpose of every nationalist is to secure more power and more prestige, not for himself, but for the nation or other unit in which he has chosen to sink his own individuality. And this was written directly in response or referring to the Nazis in Germany. But it can also be said about the United States. It can be said about France. It can be said about any country who seeks to have a strong national identity and wishes to build strong relationships around the world. There are, you talk about nationalist countries. I mean, think about some of them. There are a lot of them.
And what Trump reacted against, and our 2016 movement reacted against, was the globalism, which was all too often taking control of America, where elites of political and media elites in places like Davos and the United Nations were making decisions for our country rather than Americans. And many of those same elites are more comfortable, quite frankly, with people from Paris, France, than they are from Paris, Texas. So American nationalism says
you see, this is
Paris,
what we
Texas
see.
Right.
first.
So, Anna, it seems like he's making the case that you were making. Nationalism means exactly what I was afraid it meant.
Listen.
What Chris Cuomo is afraid of is that the world won't become globalist. Chris is a globalist. Chris believes that the borders should be open, everything should be able to come in at will, and it can't happen that way. Or the very thing that makes the United States unique and special is going to go away. And everybody knows that, all right? Everybody knows that. Now he's trying to claim the guy is making his point.
I think nationalism is a dog whistle for white nationalism. I think that's why Donald Trump said that
it's only a dog whistle if you have white nationalism on the brain, okay? And Ms. Navarro does.
There were people telling him he shouldn't say it. He knew exactly the message he was sending. And we see this, from people who want to justify and enable Donald Trump over and over again. When we see him mocking a reporter, they say he was, I don't know, dancing the Macarena. When, he pretends he doesn't hear the question about denouncing David Duke, they pretend the earpiece wasn't on well. When we hear him...
He ignored the question because it was so stupid on its face, it was unbelievable, okay? And he knew it would get you guys riled up, and it worked. He plays you guys like flutes.
Boasting about sexual assault, they pretend it's locker room talk.
I hate to say it, Navarro, it is locker room talk, okay? And every guy I know, every guy I've ever known talks like that in the privacy of the company of his friends and other men. That's how men talk. And I can tell you, according to my wife, women talk the same way. So let's drop the fake pretense.
This is what happens over and over and over again. But his base understands this clearly. He sent the message clearly. That's why he said, why else would he say, I'm not supposed to use this word?
He said he's not supposed to use it because of the reaction you guys are having right now. There's nothing wrong with nationalistic pride. And I might point out that his poll numbers are soaring in the black community, and he's doing pretty well among Hispanics who are here legally.
He knows what he is doing. And what drives
tell
me
you why.
crazy
His job is to drive you crazy because you're so stupid.
is that instead of talking about the red tide in Florida, instead of talking about the murder and cover-up that the U.S. is allowing the Saudi Arabian government to perpetrate on Jamal Khashoggi's murder, after we saw the son being forced into saluting the royals there today, we are talking about another shiny object that Trump throws and that we have to react to, because how don't you react when the President of the United States goes out and calls himself practically, a racist?
She's such a fucking stupid bitch. It's unbelievable. All right? You can talk about more than one things in a news cycle, which they do. All right? And as far as the red tide in Florida goes, what do you expect the president to do about it? Red tide exists up and down the eastern shore of the United States. I live in New England. We have red tide here every year and have almost all my life. And I'm in my 60s.
Here's why he said that he's told that he shouldn't say it. And it's a shame we've come to this point, but pride in country and pride in America first has been unfortunately regarded increasingly by many elites who believe more in transnationalism and multilateralism than they do in America. It's become regarded as something retrograde.
You think that we're criticizing?
You
think I just did what I did on the magic wall because I'm an elitist who doesn't like the idea of caring about your country? That's what.
Of course you're an elitist, Chris. You're a fucking total elitist. You're a New York elitist, okay? Your family has run the state of New York into the fucking ground. You're a multi-generational wreck of liberalism. But let's continue.
Why you think I did it, Steve?
The fact that you tried to ascribe American nationalism, that you tried to compare it to Nazi nationalism, tells me that you don't understand it at all.
Did I actually use the word Nazi? I don't believe I did,
movement.
And there's a reason I didn't. But also, let me tell you something.
You clearly tried to link the two. You started with the Nazis on this. Do you remember, Chris? You started by showing clips of the Nazis.
No such thing as American nationalism. There's just nationalism.
No,
okay?
there sure
and
is.
it's attached itself to different cultures.
There's no such thing as American nationalism. You better go back and read the papers of the Founding Fathers.
If you want to redefine it, that's fine. But let me give you a pro tip from politics. And don't use nationalism and try to redefine it. Find a new word, okay?
Enlightened American nationalism
why would
has
they
been
take
a great force for good
when
for the
creating
world.
cultural wars? Chris, why would they take that pro tip when dividing America, when fabricating culture wars, when making it them versus us has worked for Donald Trump?
Nobody has made it more them versus us than the liberals in America. It's called identity politics and social justice warriors. You guys have been slicing and dicing this fucking country up into more subgroups than I've ever seen in my life. Everybody's in a group. Everybody. All right? And it's all been done by the left, and it all started under the Obama administration. So give it a fucking rest.
The past. He's going back to his old playbook, man.
No.
There's nothing new here. What
American nationalism,
throwing out this kind of red meat and this racist dog whistling type of language.
Bannon didn't even call it American nationalism. He called it economic nationalism.
Yeah, there's lots of different types of nationalism. There's also patriotic nationalism, okay? There's economic nationalism. There's social nationalism.
Because he was trying to parse a little carefully. I don't know where you're going with American nationalism. That's an oxymoron.
American nationalism is an oxymoron. No, it's not. It's exactly what this country was founded on. A national identity. A nationally unique country, Chris. You dumb bastard. Jesus.
No, it is not. American nationalism is about individualism. It's about free enterprise, about tolerance. It's about America's leadership in the world. And it's about a country that is not based on race, that's not blood and soil, a country based on ideals. And it's about also rejecting the idea that America, as the superpower of the world, should submit to the will of multilateralism. We've done that too much, whether it's bad trade deals, unfair security deals. And it's about America saying that the world is actually better off, by the way, when every country puts itself first. Britain first, Austria first, Mexico first. There's actually, ironically, more harmony, more prosperity and security for the world when we follow those paths of enlightened self-interest rather than trying to rely on multilateral structures that
has to
benefit
do
the
with
elites.
nationalism. Even when you put a positive spin on it, it's always about, through force, putting your ideals on others, whether they want it or not.
No, it's not, Chris. Chris can't get the Nazis out of his head, okay? Because to him, that's the only origin of the word nationalism. Nationalism was used by Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln was a nationalist. Read his writings.
Now, and subverting others, that's what nationalism is. And it's interesting, you know.
It has nothing to do with subverting anybody, Chris. Talk about redefining a word.
You raise a point. George Orwell said another aspect of nationalism, maybe you're right, maybe you guys are nationalists, is flagrant dishonesty, that they will flood the zone with dishonesty because they're so sure they can convince people of what they believe to be true. Maybe that's what we're seeing with the president, Anna, in these last stretch to the midterms.
What are we forcing on others?
A false definition of nationalism, fears about foreigners, fears about what's coming in the caravan, lies about what's happening in this country, about fraudulent voters, about riots that don't happen. I can't even...
Riots that don't happen? Chris, your own network has broadcast them. You covered the riots at the colleges out west. You covered the riot that took place in Portland 2 weeks ago. What riots? Do you remember Inauguration days? They rioted in Washington, D.C. and set fires to cars, smashed windows. There are riots going on, Chris.
Remember all of them because you're flooding the zone. I'm out of time. Anna, thank you very much.
Protecting borders.
Steve, I'm out of time. But thank you very
5,000
much
lies. You're not supposed to remember 5,000 lies.
Yeah,
That's
I am, because when you don't forget them, they wind up taking root. But thank you both for having the argument.
Protecting borders is sensible nationalism.
No one said it wasn't. Anthony.
Chris, that's what this is all about. And you are in favor of it. You don't give a shit about the borders.